You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 373, and in this one I got on SJ, who has kindly agreed to share their story with us. And in particular, we talk about their early OCD experiences, nightmares. SJ details many of their compulsions, including praying, counting, organising visually, finding good numerical patterns, patterns of three, restricting food, as well as many more. We also discuss trichotillomania, intrusive thoughts around animals, online support groups, starting therapy, and thank you to our Patreons for supporting the show. And to check out all the benefits you'll receive as a Patreon, please click the link in the show notes. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. So thank you to SJ for their time. I really appreciated hearing their story. And thank you, as always, to you guys for listening. It means a lot. Without further ado, here is SJ. Welcome to the podcast, SJ.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And as you know, I'd love to hear your OCD story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important for me and probably a lot of folks who experience OCD to kind of tell the whole story. I'll keep it condensed, I promise. But, you know, for a lot of us, our symptoms and our experiences started kind of early and have jumped around. So that's kind of what I've prepared for today. So we'll go through like a little bit of a journey with little SJ. So I grew up in a small town, about 300 people in the northern US. I live in the southern US now. Very blue collar area. My father worked in a steel shop. I mean, it's really kind of an American stereotype for the working class. It could be a rock song from the 80s talking about my childhood, but we were fairly low income. My mom worked, part-time on and off. And all of that being said, I grew up in a family that just did not talk about mental health. That's gotten better over the years, but it's still something that has a lot of stigma. And I think, in modern times, I know for myself, I can get a little bit in my own bubble where I'm surrounded by people who are very open to talking about mental health and very encouraging. So it's important to remind myself when I do struggle that, I come from this background where we just did not talk about it. So the progress that I'm making today and the journey that I'm on today, is relevant in relation to that. So, my father in particular has always had what we kind of thought were quirky or strange behaviors. Checking lights, checking the oven, creating a lot of safety rituals around the house, organizing, stacking, creating symmetry in the house. And if you were to interrupt a ritual or try to change something, he was always very, very upset. He would spend weeks, sometimes months, years even, researching any purchase. And I think, being from a working class household, he kind of was able to defend this as the right way to do things since our budget was always so tight. And I think about him a lot and how his experience with poverty, he grew up below the working class. He grew up in abject poverty, really. His father was homeless. How that intersects, I guess, with what really seemed to be, I'm doing a bit of an armchair therapist here, but really seemed to be OCD symptoms. So I think about him a lot and how that's affected both him and me growing up in that environment. So when I began exhibiting symptoms, which I now recognize as OCD behaviors or symptoms, in that environment, it really didn't seem like anything was off. or anything was maybe maladaptive. So no one really questioned any of my behaviors or experiences. I would say maybe about 6 or 7 years old. I started with a little bit of like skin picking, chewing the insides of my cheeks, things like that, and experiencing what at the time I believed to be repetitive nightmares. Now I'm sort of looking at them through a lens of intrusive thoughts. They were really abstract, really disturbing, and just repeated themselves over and over for years and years, maybe 5 or 6 years. And yeah, so those were my very first experiences. And kind of building from that, I started to kind of, I guess, where a lot of my OCD experiences come from is trying to create a sense of order and calm for myself. So, at that time, I was still a young child and we attended church. They did give us the option to opt out when we got a little older, but as kids, we kind of just went as habit. So I would say my evening prayers every night, and they started to become compulsive. I would need to say them right. I'm doing air quotes right now. I know you can't see because we're on a podcast, but yeah, and it started maybe just needing to repeat them once or twice, or I would say a certain word wrong, and I would need to repeat them, or repeat them in like certain numerical patterns. And I started to get really stuck in that maybe around 7 years old or so. It got to the point where I just needed to say my evening prayers so fast that there was a very slim chance of me doing it, quote unquote, wrong. And I can hear it today. I can hear that evening prayer and how quick I could say it to try to avoid, making a mistake. So, yeah, I was a creative, kind of strange little kid. I loved being outside. I really started to connect with animals around this time. Since we lived very rurally out in the country, there were all kinds of animals around: horses, chickens, donkeys, cows. I mean, really, you name it. I had the opportunity to just kind of be one of those wild and free 1980s kids who was just running around with very little oversight. And what I found myself always drawn to was spending time with animals. As a teen, there started to be an increase in those just right feelings. Around that same time, I started. Now, this is very abstract. I already know I'm going to have a hard time explaining this, but I started hearing and feeling kind of a counting in my head. It's kind of a picking number tracker inside of my head. I've worked on this a lot, so it's very quiet now, and I'm thankful for that. But the best way I can explain it is kind of like in the Matrix movies where they show the numbers running on the screen. Or when you see a big, huge block of like web code, that's sort of what my brain started to do and still does. Like I said, it's much quieter today, which I'm thankful for, but I really didn't know what that was. It felt like sort of an offshoot, a little sprout from those nightmares as a child. Very abstract, but definitely more organized. It's sort of counting items that are in my vision, organizing them mentally, or even if there's not something to organize visually, my brain is kind of finding numerical patterns that are good, quote unquote. Like I said, I knew even today, this is hard to explain, but it's very much my experience. Around this time, my brain decided that the number 3 was just the very best number, and patterns of 3, which has been something that I've grown to struggle with because it kind of evolved out of an intrusive thought and into any of those like checking behaviors that developed a little later that I'll talk about. started to fall into those patterns, as well as the just right feeling. So if something didn't feel right at 3, maybe it would feel better at 9 checks. If that didn't quite feel right, maybe 12. And, it could build off of that into the hundreds. Yeah, so that's probably the the most abstract experience I have with my OCD symptoms. But like I said early in the call, I'm hoping if someone else is experiencing something like that, hearing this, they'll know that they're not alone. As a teen, I started focusing a lot on the symmetry of my body. I think it's not uncommon for teenagers, especially like as they're entering puberty, whatever it may be, to start focusing on their body and becoming more aware of it. For me, that was focusing on the symmetry. I specifically at that time, because I was, an athletic child, I focused, I guess, a lot on my shoulders and how symmetrical they were. And I really liked that and started to wish that my body was a little bit more like that. So as a teen, I started, playing some sports. I also started jumping rope and running. I noticed in my experience with sports that physical exertion could really quiet some of the things in my head. So I really, I was becoming more aware of my body. I wanted some control over it. So running, jumping rope, exercise, things like that as a teen helped quiet that. And as a result, I started to lose weight. I was already a small kid, but my body started to become more like angular, more square. And to me, this was really pleasing, not from like a weight loss perspective, but I was perceiving my body as more symmetrical. So I really focused in on this as a teen. I became really focused on this, started restricting food. And then, of course, because of how society is, people were complimenting me on, my weight loss, my thinness, which really reinforced it from every different angle, really. I was pleased with the symmetry of my body. I felt like I had some control and some order, and I was also getting, attention in a positive way, which is challenging. Especially, like I said, as a teen, you're becoming more aware, and it's really influential. Around this time, I started having a lot of body-focused behaviors. Started like as a young teen, like shaving my arms and just like trying to make my body feel cleaner and more orderly. I also, because I was paying so much attention to my body, like I started becoming hyper aware of the sounds and actions, like the functions of my body. So like blinking, swallowing, things like that. And because those are you have to keep blinking. You have to swallow. You have to breathe. Those are continued actions of your body in a functioning state. But because they were ever present, I could fit them into like a numerical pattern. I could, like, as I was blinking, be like 1, 2, 3 quietly in my head, and it was fitting into that pattern. So it was kind of feeding my need to fit things into that pattern that I felt like was right.
Yeah.
I think that talking about the teen years is always the hardest because you're really figuring out who you are. I mean, we always are, but as a teen, I really, my themes really jumped around, and I had a lot of body focus at that time. Started pulling my eyelashes out, not by hand, but with tweezers, which I know even I don't experience this anymore. So it's hard to hear now and to imagine that I did this, but I pulled the bottom row of my eyelashes out on both eyes for several years as a teenager, because I just could not, your eyelashes just don't grow perfectly. And I couldn't, I just couldn't sit with that. Somehow I maintained my top row of eyelashes, but the bottom were just somehow unacceptable to me as a teen. So yeah, as I kind of grew out of that, that like period of puberty and really focusing, I guess, on my body a lot as a teen. As a young adult, I started, I shifted my focus, put a lot of that energy into having, perfect grades. I received a scholarship to go to college. I was able to move away from home and into some low-income government housing near my college, and I was able to attend college, which was really exciting for me.
Yeah.
Around this time, with the numbers kind of still rolling along in my head, but my body-focused behaviors really kind of quieting down, I started to, as a young adult, get out into the quote unquote real world and see the things that were going on in the world. And I started really feeling like the deep sense of imbalance and unfairness that existed in the universe for everyone. I mean, across the entire universe, humans, animals. It was a stark contrast to, being a child and being in a small town. I was out there in the real world and realizing that it just isn't necessarily the easiest place to be, and that there's a lot going on that I was maybe a little insulated from. Around this time in my early adulthood, I got my first pet as an adult, my beloved bunny, Uzi. He lived for about 11 years, such an amazing little guy. And around this time, I began also experiencing intrusive thoughts about animals. I started to really, like I said, focus on the like unfairness in the universe, but it focused in on the suffering of animals, related to just like the natural cycle of nature, which is inherently cruel, I think, to a certain extent. And I just couldn't accept that the state of nature included like pain and suffering of these innocent little beings. Around this time, people, friends, people in my community started kind of leaning on me as the animal person that they know, calling me when they needed help getting kittens out from under their shed, or if they found a stray animal. And this really, I don't know, like kind of made my connection to animals even more steadfast, and also, increased these intrusive thoughts about like, look at these sweet, innocent animals that are just being mistreated or, being displaced. They're having to have their babies underneath sheds. And it really started amping those thoughts up. In my 20s, since I had been, involved in sports and fairly athletic, I joined a roller derby league and started working part-time at a gym while I was going to college. At a later point, one of the roller derby leagues that I played with were sponsored by a CrossFit gym. If we need to leave the name out, I didn't even think of that. We can't. Okay, fair. And I discovered a new type of exercise that really shut up my brain. When you're doing like high intensity interval training, you cannot think. You're barely hanging in there. It's just too physically strenuous. And this was my first experience with this type of a workout, and I loved it. I was like, there's nothing like this. I came from a family that didn't talk about mental health. I had never known even one person who had been in therapy ever. And so, I found something that quieted my brain, and I just dove in head first. I was very, very much overdoing it. I was just desperately seeking some quiet and some peace inside of my head, quiet the counting, quiet the intrusive thoughts and the rumination. at one point, somewhere within this period of time, I'm a regular journal keeper, so I can look back and see that at some point I was waking up around 3 a.m. to go swim before work with a friend's gym pass. I was going to the gym to do the interval training on my lunch breaks, maybe popping in for a 2 a day after work. And then I was still playing roller derby on a competitive level. So, having 3 or 4 hour practices 3 or 4 times a week. So during this period of time, my brain and my body wasn't quite there yet. I was in my early 20s. So, but my brain was too exhausted to continue a lot of the counting, the rumination, the things that I've spoke of. And I got a lot of relief during this period of time. Around this time, I started a pet care business. So this is like dog walking, holiday visits when people are traveling for cats, other animals. I even did some farm sitting. So this was a good way for me to control my schedule, which was a little erratic since I was playing a competitive sport. And around this time, I also started to see a therapist. I could not even tell you what it was that kind of, the straw that broke the camel's back that got me to try it out. But I'm glad that I did. It was a long journey, but I started going to a student clinic at a local university. So this is like graduate students who are, logging hours as they're finishing their studies. So very sliding scale, something really affordable. And I received a generalized anxiety diagnosis. Within that, my therapists, and I don't want to disparage them in any way, they did a great job from their perspective as treating someone that they believed had generalized anxiety disorder. But we struggled to work together. After she graduated, I did transfer to another therapist within the program. And we also struggled. They were both able to help me in a lot of other aspects in my life and really build some stability. But the OCD remained and was getting stronger and louder. I remember trying to explain to my therapist at one point, and they're looking at this through just an anxiety viewpoint, which certainly exists within OCD. I'm not saying that they don't, but I remember explaining that, on my way to the session, I had seen a paper bag, just some litter on the side of the street, recognized it as a paper bag, and then kind of visually watched it transform into an animal that had perhaps been hit by a car or was injured or suffering, and then visually see it and recognize it as a bag again, almost like a hallucination, but kind of just like a mental, my brain was trying to make it something to worry about more than I needed to, with it just being a piece of litter. And I remember saying this during a session, and she just, God bless her, but she just kind of stared at me like, what? Yeah, and we did our best working together, but I was still continuing to work out at an extremely intense level to keep my intrusive thoughts, abated, kind of quiet. But if I even took like 2 days off, if I got a cold and hadn't been at the gym or something, they would just come back so quickly. And I think during this time, I started to kind of recognize that maybe this isn't the solution. So at this point, I was maybe in my early 30s, 32, 33, something like that. And my body it just started to shut down. I had unhealed injuries. I played roller derby for 10 years, maybe 11. So I had concussions. just those little injuries that when you're young and you play sports, you're like, that's fine. And then later it rains and you're like, why does that hurt now? So those types of things were catching up with me. I was just exhausted. I couldn't keep up with anyone in the gym anymore. I took a little break from roller derby so that I could just cut my hours down in terms of like physical exertion. But I found that I couldn't get into that zone in the gym where I could just get my brain to shut up, for lack of a better way to put it. And this was really emotionally hard for me. I struggled to get into that. And I don't know if it was just, my body adapting, my body breaking down, a combination. I couldn't get there anymore. I couldn't shut them up by just exhausting myself. And then the pandemic arrived, and I couldn't go to the gym at all. And these thoughts, these obsessions, these ruminations just came back like a freight train. I started checking, I started checking doors, checking the oven, checking anything that could be checked. And they were falling into those numerical patterns of 3. So if 3 didn't feel right, it became 6, it became 9, it became 99, it became, during this period of time, I started carrying like a small screwdriver, like a little repair set with me because I was breaking people's doors when I was leaving. I was checking so much. And maybe I had gone to walk someone's dog or to visit a friend. And I would leave and maybe they weren't paying attention, but I was still checking their door so much that I was maybe loosening it on the frame and I needed to tighten it again. It became a much bigger problem in terms of how these thoughts were affecting my everyday life. So while I was more isolated during the pandemic, I started experiencing more and more intrusive thoughts related to animals. And my compulsion related to those was not to avoid, but to kind of convince myself that I needed to honor the suffering that I was thinking about by just like being deeply, deeply involved in the intrusive thought. So if I'm having a very detailed intrusive thought related to how, maybe something I saw in the news about a duck in an oil spill that I know couldn't have survived, something like that, whatever it may be. They would just run on a visual loop. And I felt the responsibility to deeply, deeply think about that suffering and just sit with it. That was kind of how my compulsion with those intrusive thoughts worked. This would lead me, I do have a specific example, so I guess a small trigger warning. This does involve an animal death. I once saw a state trooper, which is kind of the highway police, I guess you could say, here in the United States, but a deer had been hit by a car. And I knew that it was suffering and they had to shoot it. And I saw this firsthand. I was the car in front of me, I think, that hit the deer. So I was the first person sitting there waiting to go around, and it just happened before I even realized what was happening in front of me. So that thought would appear to me in really graphic detail, even more graphic than I actually saw it. My brain would create extra detailed specifics to make it worse, and just visually zoom in on those parts and play them kind of just repetitively, very similar to those quote unquote nightmares that I had as a child that I'm kind of viewing through an intrusive thought lens now. But I felt like I had to sit in it and let it just take over my brain and my life out of respect for the life that was lost. This led me having many days where I was just completely broken out in hives from the stress, crying in between work meetings. And this wasn't it. My primary theme related to intrusive thoughts is like the negative ways that humans affect animals and specifically like their suffering. But I mean, you turn the news on and there's a number of terrible things happening, whether they're related to animals, society, people. I remember I had the same experience after seeing the murder of George Floyd on the news. My intrusive thoughts are not only attached to animals, but that is kind of the primary, but they expand out into anything that I can ruminate about, really. So yeah, during the pandemic, things were slowed down. I started to talk to my parents a little bit more and really connect with them and see how untreated mental illness has affected my family history. Over the last 5 years or so, my mother's gone to the hospital maybe twice, I think, thinking she was having a heart attack. I mean, she's one of the fittest people I know. And of course, that was not what was happening. She was having panic attacks, and they would send her home, and she still hasn't sought out therapy yet. My father continues to have his experiences with, safety behaviors, checking research, things like that. And I really wanted to break that cycle. I already felt like I had by, going to therapy, whether I made the progress I wanted to or not. I felt like I was on that path. So during the pandemic, I started trying out online support groups. I needed something affordable since I wasn't making much money during the pandemic. I went to an anxiety support group for a few months. I did find it helpful. And, it wasn't quite the right fit for me. So I started trying out just a ton of different support groups. I thought, okay, now's the time. Things are slow in my life for the first time ever, maybe. So let me see what's really going on with me. Huge shout out to peer support groups. I have connected with so many amazing people in those spaces. And, hearing their stories made me feel like I was not alone, especially during pandemic isolation when I was factually very alone. A lot of us were. So at one point I stumbled across an OCD group. This is the Pay What You Can peer support group. Little shout out for them. I know you've had Lydia on your podcast, who is one of my support group friends. And I thought, why not? I didn't really know what OCD was, but I had tried out kind of every setting. I really thought it was what you see on television. I thought everyone had, a cleaning theme or something related to, I just didn't know. I came to the group and, was my cheerful self, camera on, kind of like happy to be there and hear things. And I pretty quickly had to turn my camera off because I was becoming emotional. I couldn't believe that I was in this setting with all of these people whose brains worked a lot like mine. We didn't share a theme. Maybe there were a few crossovers, but I just saw so much of myself in the people in the support group. And they were so wonderful and welcoming. And this was just really eye-opening for me. After attending group for about 6 months, I finally sought out an OCD specialist. I did not have insurance at the time, so I had to pay, the lovely American healthcare system. So I needed to pay out of pocket, which I think is just shy of $200 per session. So that was almost impossible for me, but I sat down and, I do have OCD, so I love a spreadsheet. I sat down, I did my budget, and I made it happen. I did receive a diagnosis, and we did about maybe, not as many sessions as I needed, but maybe 10 or 15. yeah, kind of got a hold of things and started to really understand what was going on with myself. Since we were so limited in time, we struggled a bit to practice standard ERP since some of my compulsions relate differently, I guess. So like when I experience my intrusive thoughts, my compulsion is to sit with them. I also experience like a different theme of intrusive thoughts, and my compulsion for that is to avoid. So it's really very nuanced, and I needed a little bit more time. But we did our best. My like checking compulsion, symmetry, things like that really fit into the ERP textbook easily. So we had some good success with that, and I was able to continue doing exposures on my own and tracking, and yeah, we did a little values-based therapy and kind of graduated me out when I could no longer afford to do so. So, kind of fast forwarding to now, I continued to attend support group. I have been working towards my values. I still have a lot of work to do, but I am working again with a specialist, an OCD specialist, and finding those nuances. Like I said, my theme is happy to jump around and adapt. So, being able to name those things and find the compulsion and, work with how, like I said, my compulsions are very creative, which is, I think, I try to be as positive as I can about it. They're a reflection of me. I'm very creative as well. So, they're finding ways to adjust, and I'm finding ways to adjust as well and to work on those compulsions. So, yeah, I've been, like I said, working towards those values while, just being a person who has OCD. After years and years with really disturbing intrusive thoughts, specifically about chickens. I don't know. I didn't have chickens growing up. I think it's just that they are prey animals and they're very low on the food chain. So I think it was just easy, low-hanging fruit for my brain to create intrusive thoughts. But I've always thought that they were just so wonderful and so funny and interesting. They're these little like dinosaurs that can live in your car. They're amazing. So regardless of having those ruminations and intrusive thoughts, I finally got hens. So now I have chickens in my yard, and I'm working on creating, a life that I love and accepting that this is how my brain is. I can reach more stable levels of recovery, and I'm working very hard on that. But I'm kind of realizing at my age, I'm 39. That I can't wait forever to enjoy my life. I can't wait until I'm quote unquote well, because that might not happen for me. And that's okay. Yeah. It's so funny. These little chickens have helped me so much with this transition. It's been so scary for me to have them. They're an exposure in and of themselves, and to be attached to them and to care for them, and knowing that they will die. I mean, chickens have a short lifespan, and it's kind of that maybe they will, maybe they won't every day. And I can do my best to support them and create a really good life for them and myself. So, like I said, I'm still with my support group. It's been about a year and a half. I may even be going on 2 years now. It is such a relief to weekly have a group of people who don't require a big, long explanation to understand, kind of where I'm coming from. Of course, it's great to talk through the nuances, but just to be there and to offer support when I've gone through a similar experience, and vice versa, or even to see people nodding their heads when I share something. Sometimes it's not even something verbal. It's just like a slight nod from several people in your support group, and you know that you're not alone. Yeah, the connections that I've had with a support group, across the globe, has been amazing. And now, through the pandemic, I have a stable 9 to 5 office style job. I do still have my pet care business, which I do on the side. I don't want to avoid the things that I love, just to avoid intrusive thoughts. So I do still have my business, but I have a stable 9 to 5 job that has good insurance benefits. Thank goodness. So I can afford a specialist. We are maybe a month in or so. So we're really developing like a successful combination of ERP, values-based therapy, and kind of what works for me. And like I said, like breaking apart all of the experiences that I've had, and the theme, the theme jumping and the compulsions kind of coming in through the side door rather than the front door where you might expect them. And it's really helpful to have someone to navigate that with me, and be able to, kind of pin them down and say, here's how it's acting, here's what it's doing, here's what we can do about it. So I'm really excited. I know that, I'm in for the long haul. Like I said, I'm committed to building a life that I love. And, I'm in it for the long haul. I know I'll continue to work on myself. I may never reach, that point where I'm quote unquote well, but I can still have a great life. So I'm here for the ride.
Nice. Well, look, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm glad you talked about your theme of worrying about animals, because it's one I've heard many times, but it's not one I've actually heard on the podcast. So it's great to kind of put that out there for, I'm sure, the many people that also are bothered by these worries. So, at the beginning you said about your family background just didn't really talk about mental health or anything along those lines. Whereas now you're here on this podcast, sharing your story. So what was that transition like for you of like learning to open up, I guess, or share?
Yeah, it really, it really started with that first step of seeking out therapy. I know, talking through it, I definitely really just like stumbled my way into into a therapeutic setting. And, we worked through anxiety, which wasn't quite the right fit. And, then I found out about OCD, came to a support group. So it was really just me getting comfortable talking about it, and then realizing how much it helped me to be around people who were comfortable speaking about their mental health. And now I cannot stop talking about how important mental health is. So I get on the phone with my parents, and, we're doing the regular, how was your day? And I'm so eager to say, oh, I was in therapy. It was a good day. Working some stuff for myself. They don't need to know the ins and outs of each session, but just normalizing it, I feel like is really important. So it's gotten easier to talk about with my family. And I mean, at one point, somewhat recently, my mother even joined me in a Zoom support group for anxiety. She didn't share, and she eventually decided it wasn't the right fit for her after maybe 4 sessions, something like that. She tried, which is really important to me, to see that, she's open to it. And that's not my decision to make for them. Of course, I hope that everyone in the world can find peace within their own psyche and with their mental health. Maybe that's unrealistic, but I hope so. And I think normalizing it is the first step. Like, it's okay. You would say ouch or something if you banged your elbow into the wall. So it's also okay to express when something's going on, and you may need a mental health day from work, or you may need to step out of a meeting, something like that. So normalization is important.
Yeah, really good point on that. So was there a moment in your recovery that, either how OCD works or the treatment, like something just clicked and you kind of got it?
I think it was realizing that compulsions do not work. There's not like a specific roadmap for them. So really realizing that, okay, I experience really intense intrusive thoughts related to animal suffering.
Hmm.
My compulsion for that is to engage, to just really let myself sink in it. And like I said, I experience other types of intrusive thoughts, like a lot of judgments about other people, kind of that voice that says everyone's disgusting and awful, you can't trust them. And my compulsion for that is to avoid. So really like realizing that there's so much nuance, and that my brain doesn't follow a roadmap, which seems it seems like I should have realized that a long time ago, but I kind of I don't, I mentioned it earlier. I'm a spreadsheet person, and I'm like, well, there's a formula and I'll just figure it out. But accepting and realizing that that's really not how it works, and that I need to kind of like settle in for the long haul, because there's a little bit more work to do. So yeah, kind of accepting that there's no simple formula was really a really eye-opening for me, and has helped me make a lot of progress.
Yeah, awesome. And so obviously you've got the chickens, and that's obviously been a real benefit to your life, but also it's been a trigger and an exposure for you.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say it is with other animals now, like the maybe ones that you're not around a lot, or thinking about maybe the suffering in the world towards animals, and eh,
Yeah,
how are you with kind of making, I don't want to say making peace, but making space for all of that?
yeah, it's a work in progress for sure. I also have, I have like a whole barnyard here, basically. I
Okay.
have a foster dog. I have a cat.
Mm,
I'm surrounded by animals, and I'm also, I mentioned that I grew up north. I grew up in northeastern Ohio in the United States, where there was recently that terrible chemical spill,
mm,
which is killing animals right now. It's a environmental disaster. So,
mm.
I can't say I'm not experiencing intrusive thoughts related to that. And I'm working on it every day. I think recognizing that what you're having intrusive thoughts about and what you value, and
Yeah.
they don't have to be, it's pretty typical in my experience talking to others that they are very related. They're dancing a bit of a waltz together. Your intrusive thoughts are attacking the thing that you may care about the most. And that doesn't mean that you don't have to continue caring about that thing.
Mm,
So, like I said, kind of working toward having a life that's full of the things that I value, even if I'm doing it scared, uh, has been, it's been life changing for me. Has it increased at times my intrusive thoughts? Yes. But has it also made my life better? Yes. So just deciding, I guess, where you want to live within that balance is kind of where I'm at now.
yeah, really good point. And I guess when you talked about that chemical spill, what came to my mind was, to a point, that's always going to bother you, right? Because it's your value to care for animals, and seeing that is going to hurt you in some way, right? It's going to upset you because you don't want animals to suffer. But I guess it's working on the OCD aspect of when it leaves that and then morphs into OCD, when now I can't get it out of my head. Um, and maybe
Yeah.
that's what we reduce. But to a point, it's always going to bother you because that's your value.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't want to be a person who doesn't care.
Yeah.
But I also need to be a person who realizes that there's only a certain level of control I have
Mm,
over, and creating these elaborate rituals and things that are hurting me,
yeah.
is not actually making that any better. It's just hurting me.
Yeah. True. True. Okay, so I guess words of hope for those listening.
Oh gosh, okay. Words of hope for those listening. I was thinking about the billboard question. I was like, here it comes, but words of hope, I wasn't
Yeah,
ready.
that's coming, but
Fair enough. Yeah, I want to say, oh my gosh, it's so cheesy. I want to say that it gets better. But I think that may not actually be what I'm trying to express. It can change, whether it's better. I don't know, but I do know that my life is now, by doing things scared, by working on myself and working on these intrusive thoughts, I have created a life that I do like more than the life I was living when I just didn't know what was going on with myself. I was just like, if I just work out enough, my brain won't function. And that's a solution. That is not a long-term solution. So yeah, I guess my words of hope for people would be that that you can make a change in your life. Will it get a little worse along the way and then a little better? Perhaps. But you really are the person in control of your own life. And if you would like to make a change and you have the means and the ability to do so, it's worth a try. And if you don't have the means or the ability to do so, it's worth asking for help if you can.
Really good point. So you got a billboard. What do you want written on that billboard?
Yeah. So I thought about this a lot. Dare I say, ruminated on it a little bit. But I think, I would keep it really simple, just like a big black billboard, white lettering. It is not too late. Because I think this can relate to so many things. There have been so many times in my life so far where I thought it was too late for me to make connections, for me to seek treatment, to do some of these things that now I'm recognizing are my values, to build a home, a place that I feel safe and seen. I've lived in campers with no heat or water. I've struggled to get groceries, lived in government housing, which, if anyone knows, just is is quite an experience. It's always backed up pipes, rats, roaches. I've experienced, the depths of my brain and the sorrow that it can create. Yet, when I take a chance and build a life that aligns with my values, I make a little progress every time, even if it's so tiny. That's built up over time. So I've realized that it isn't too late. I now, after all those experiences, I own a home. I have a yard full of chickens. I have a foster dog. I have a cat, tons of animal friends, some human friends in there too. Even though it's hard, I've also connected closer to my family, and it's not too late, right? This very second that we are existing in, it is not too late for whatever it is that you're working towards. So that's what I would put on my billboard. It's not too late.
Nice. I like that. Really good point. And lastly, is there anything else you wish you could have shared today?
I think, yeah, thank you so much for giving me the time to quite literally talk through my life story. I thought about whether I wanted to really go that far back or not. And I thought, well, it's important because it really shows the development. So I think I was able to share everything that I wanted to. And I hope that, people find value in this. And if not, in another podcast episode. And I hope that they keep listening, and I hope that they keep connecting, however that is, because, it's not too late and you're not alone. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I know many will get something out of this. So thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Stuart.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.